What's really happening with women and infidelity in 2025? You've seen it all over social media, TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, everywhere. The claim that women are now cheating just as much as men. Some people are even saying women cheat more. And honestly, the comment sections are going insane over this. Half the people are calling it nonsense. The other half are sharing their own stories, like it's some kind of confessional. So, I decided to dig into the actual research, the real statistics, the peer-reviewed studies, and what I found is way more complicated than anyone on social media is telling you, because the truth is, they're kind of right, but they're also kind of wrong, and the full story is pretty shocking. Let me show you what's really going on. So first, let's start with the baseline statistics that most people reference. According to the General Social Survey, which is one of the most respected sources for this data, 20% of married men admit to having sex with someone other than their spouse while married. For women, that number is 13%. So, on the surface, yeah, men cheat more. That's been the pattern for decades. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part that's driving all the social media conversation. Since 1990, women's infidelity rates have increased by 40%. 40%. Let that sink in. Meanwhile, men's rates have stayed pretty much flat. They haven't really moved. So, while men still cheat more overall, the gap is closing fast. And in certain age groups, women have overtaken men. Here's the stat that's blowing people's minds. Among adults aged 18 to 29, 11% of women admit to cheating. For men in that same age group, it's 10%. Women are cheating more than men in the youngest generation. That's a complete reversal from how things used to be. And this is why you're seeing so many viral posts about this topic, because younger people are experiencing this shift in real time. They're watching it happen in their own relationships and social circles. But before everyone loses their minds, let me show you what happens as people get older, because the pattern changes. In the 30 to 39 age group, things flip. 14% of men admit to cheating in this bracket. For women, it drops to 11%. So, men take the lead again. Now here's where it gets really interesting. As people hit their 40s and 50s, women's infidelity rates spike up. Women aged 40 to 49 show some of the highest rates of cheating for their gender. Same with women in their 50s, about 16 to 18% in those age ranges. But then, men absolutely explode in their 60s and 70s. Between ages 60 and 69, 29% of men admit to infidelity. And for men aged 70 to 79, it's 26%. That's more than 1 in 4 men. So the pattern is clear. Young women are cheating more than they used to. Middle-aged women maintain relatively high rates. But older men still dominate the statistics. The question everyone should be asking isn't just who cheats more. It's why are these patterns changing? Why is women's infidelity rising? So, let's talk about what's actually driving this 40% increase since 1990. Because it's not just one thing, it's a perfect storm of social changes. First, there's the obvious one: more women in the workforce. When you spend 8 to 10 hours a day with the same people, relationships develop. 30% of affairs start in the workplace. That's not a small number. And as more women entered professional environments over the past 3 decades, they had more opportunity, more proximity to potential affair partners. Second, and this is huge, attitudes about female sexuality have changed dramatically. Women are more comfortable admitting to affairs now than they were in 1990. The stigma hasn't disappeared, but it's definitely lessened. So, part of what we're seeing might not even be an increase in actual cheating. It might just be an increase in honest reporting. Third, economic independence. This one's interesting because the data shows something specific. Financially dependent men are 15% more likely to cheat on their partners. For women who are financially dependent, that number is only 5%. So, As women gained more economic independence over the past 30 years, the traditional power dynamics in relationships shifted, and with that shift came changes in behavior. Fourth, and this is the big one for 2025, technology and dating apps. 40% of people who cheated did so through online interactions. Apps like Tinder, dating sites, social media, they've made connecting with someone outside your relationship incredibly easy. You don't even have to leave your house. You can start an affair from your couch while your spouse is in the next room. The barriers that used to exist just aren't there anymore, and women have just as much access to these platforms as men do. Now, here's where the conversation gets even more complicated because not all cheating is the same. There's physical infidelity and emotional infidelity, and men and women engage with these differently. When it comes to emotional affairs, meaning intimate relationships without physical contact, the numbers flip completely. 91.6% of women admit to having had an emotional affair. For men, it's 78.6%. Women are more likely to have emotional affairs. Men are more likely to have physical affairs. So, when someone asks who cheats more, the answer literally depends on how you define cheating. If you're only counting physical sex, men still lead. If you're counting emotional intimacy with someone outside the relationship, women lead by a huge margin. And here's the thing that really matters. 88% of women say they're more upset by emotional cheating than physical cheating. For men, it's only about half that. So women are engaging more in the exact type of cheating that women find most devastating. That's wild when you think about it. Let's talk about how these affairs actually begin, because it's not what most people think. 37% of affairs start with existing friends, not strangers, not people you meet at a bar. Friends, people you already know and trust. 30% start with coworkers. So right there, 67% of affairs are happening with people who are already in your life. For women specifically, the breakdown is even more skewed toward people they know. 40.6% of women have affairs with existing friends, 33.3% with coworkers. Men show similar patterns, but they're slightly more likely to seek out affairs through dating apps. Almost 15% of men who cheat use dating apps to do it. For women, it's under 5%. So, women are cheating with people they already have emotional connections with. Men are more willing to seek out strangers specifically for physical encounters. Again, different patterns for different types of cheating. The social media distortion. Now let's talk about why this feels like an epidemic when the numbers don't actually show one. On TikTok alone, there are over 350 million posts about cheating. Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, they're all flooded with infidelity content. And here's why that content does so well. It's got everything the algorithm loves: high emotional stakes, drama, clear villains and victims, a story that makes people want to comment, share, argue. So these posts go viral constantly. And when you're scrolling through your feed, seeing story after story about cheating, what does your brain start to believe? That everyone's doing it, that it's absolutely everywhere. Young people especially believe this. 57% of young women and 44% of young men believe that infidelity is extremely common or very common in relationships. But here's the reality check. Despite all the social media content, actual infidelity rates haven't exploded. They've been relatively stable over the past couple decades. What's changed is how visible it is, how much we talk about it, how the algorithm serves you content about it. Because you watched one video, the perception has shifted way more than the reality, and that perception is creating a kind of relationship doom spiral. People go into relationships already expecting to be cheated on, already looking for signs, already building walls, because social media has convinced them it's inevitable. The hard facts. All right, let me hit you with some rapid-fire statistics that paint the complete picture. 47.7% of people who cheat confess to their partner within a week. So, despite what you see in movies, Most people can't keep it secret for long. The guilt eats at them. 54.5% of infidelity cases lead to divorce, more than half. So, if you're thinking an affair won't end your marriage, the odds aren't in your favor. People who cheat once are 3 times more likely to cheat again in their next relationship. So that whole once a cheater, always a cheater thing has some statistical backing. 60% of people who had affairs say they were not planning to leave their partner before it happened. They were not looking for an exit. The affair just happened, which tells you a lot about opportunity versus intention. 16% of married couples admit to having been unfaithful at least once during their current marriage, not previous marriages, their current one. Only 25% of cheaters actually admit the affair to their partner. Most of the time, they get caught or someone else tells. Very few people voluntarily confess. 70% of people who cheat say they regret it. But that doesn't stop it from happening. And here's one that surprised me. 2 to 3% of children are the product of infidelity. Their father isn't who he thinks he is. That's millions of families walking around with a secret they might not even know about. Who's most at risk? Let me tell you who's statistically most likely to cheat, because there are patterns. People who grew up in homes where their parents divorced are 18% likely to cheat. People from intact families are only 15% likely. So, childhood experiences with relationship stability matter. People who are economically dependent on their partners show higher rates of infidelity. For men who are financially dependent, it's 15%. For women, 5%. There's something about power dynamics and resentment that drives this. People who are confident about their bodies are more likely to cheat. 35% of women who are satisfied with their appearance admit to cheating. For men, it's 25%. Better self-image apparently correlates with more opportunities and more willingness to act on them. People in relationships where they're separated but not divorced show the highest rates. 44%. Makes sense because the relationship is already broken. People who are married but living apart are at 28%, and those who are together but considering separation are at 24%. So marital discord is a massive predictor. Why people actually cheat. Let's get into motivations, because understanding why matters if you want to avoid it. 44% of men who cheat say they wanted more sex, just straight up sexual desire for variety and excitement. For women, only about 14 to 15% cite wanting more adventurous sex as the reason. Instead, 40% of women say they cheated for emotional reasons, needing attention, wanting to feel desired, feeling neglected or undervalued in their primary relationship. 50% of men who cheated say they were unhappy with their sex life. For women, it's 35%. So, sexual dissatisfaction drives cheating for both, but it's a bigger factor for men. About 30% of people say the affair happened because of opportunity. They were not looking for it. The situation just presented itself. Maybe they were traveling for work. Maybe they were at a party without their partner. Maybe someone made a move and they didn't stop it. Circumstance matters more than people want to admit. And here's a messed up one. 11% of women who cheated say they did it as revenge. Their partner cheated first or hurt them badly, so they evened the score. Revenge affairs are a real thing. Men and women don't just cheat differently. They react to being cheated on differently too. Both men and women react more strongly if their partner cheats with someone of the opposite gender. If a woman's husband cheats with another woman, she's more devastated than if he cheated with a man. Same pattern for men. Men are more likely to end the relationship over physical infidelity. Women are more likely to end it over same-sex affairs by their partner. The psychology behind this is fascinating. For women, emotional betrayal cuts deeper. For men, sexual betrayal is the deal breaker. It goes back to how each gender defines what cheating really means. Can relationships survive? So, here's the big question everyone wants answered. Can a relationship survive infidelity? The statistics say maybe. 57% of marriages fail after infidelity, but that means 43% survive. It's not an automatic death sentence. About 40% of couples who experience cheating report that they were able to repair the relationship and move forward. But it takes time, serious effort, therapy, complete transparency, and forgiveness, which is probably the hardest part. 72.7% of women who had affairs have considered divorce. So even if they stay, the thought is there. The relationship is fundamentally changed. Most experts say it takes 2 to 5 years to fully rebuild trust after an affair. Some couples never get there, but some do come out stronger because they're forced to address problems they were ignoring. Here is a quick side note about how the US compares globally. Some countries have way higher infidelity rates than we do. Thailand leads at 51%, Denmark is at 46%, Italy is at 45%. So, depending on where you live, cultural attitudes about monogamy are completely different. In some places, affairs are almost expected. In others, they're still deeply shameful. The US falls somewhere in the middle. We talk about it constantly, but still condemn it publicly. Let's circle back to technology for a second, because this is reshaping everything. Up to 30% of internet users go online for sexual purposes, and 2/3 of them end up meeting their online partner in person. So, what starts as messages or video chats frequently becomes physical. Over 10% of adults form intimate online relationships. 8% engage in cybersex. 6% meet their online partners face to face. And 25% of people specifically use dating apps for infidelity, not for dating, for cheating. There are people on Tinder right now who are married and swiping. Their spouse has no idea. The ease of access is destroying relationships that might have survived in a previous era, because temptation used to require opportunity. Now, opportunity is unlimited. It's in your pocket 24/7. What this all means for 2025. So, let's bring this all together. What's really happening with women and infidelity in 2025? Here's the truth. Women are cheating more than they used to. That's not a myth. The 40% increase since 1990 is real. Young women are now cheating at slightly higher rates than young men. That's a genuine shift in behavior patterns. But men still cheat more overall. When you look at all age groups combined, the gap is just narrowing. And depending on how you define cheating, the answer to who cheats more completely changes. Physical affairs, men still lead. Emotional affairs, women dominate. Social media has created this perception that infidelity is absolutely everywhere, that everyone's doing it, that relationships are basically doomed. But the actual statistics don't support an epidemic. What we're seeing is more visibility, more discussion, more viral content, not necessarily more actual cheating. Technology has made affairs easier to start and harder to hide. Dating apps, social media, encrypted messaging, all of it lowers the barriers and increases the opportunities. And as women gain more economic independence, spend more time in workplaces, and face less social stigma about sexuality, their behavior is shifting closer to historical male patterns. That's what's really happening. Not that women are suddenly more immoral or unfaithful by nature, but that the circumstances that historically made male infidelity more common are now affecting women too. So, when someone tells you women cheat just as much as men, they're simplifying a complicated situation. In some demographics, yes. In some definitions of cheating, yes. Overall, not quite yet, but the gap is closing fast. The real question isn't who cheats more. It's why are we all so obsessed with this question? Maybe it's because we're all terrified it's going to happen to us. Maybe it's because the social media algorithm keeps serving us content that confirms our worst fears. Or maybe it's because modern relationships are harder than ever. We expect more emotional intimacy than previous generations. We have unlimited access to alternatives through technology, and we're constantly bombarded with messages that everyone's cheating. That's a recipe for paranoia and relationship anxiety. The statistics tell us infidelity is real, it's common, but it's not universal. Most people don't cheat. Most relationships survive without infidelity, but the ones that do experience it are changed forever. Whether you're male or female, young or old, the best protection against infidelity isn't suspicion. It's building a relationship where both people feel valued, heard, sexually satisfied, and emotionally connected. Because that's what the research actually shows. Happy couples cheat less. It's that simple and that complicated.